Welcome back in, everybody, to a Wednesday edition of Birds 365. Joined now by Brandon Lee Gowton of Bleeding Green Nation. BLJ, we're 2-2, and it feels like we're 0-4, brother. How you doing on this Wednesday morning?
Well, after watching a game like that this past weekend, I'm not really devastated that the Eagles aren't playing this coming weekend.
I will say this, Brent. I don't agree with that. I look at this team and say, I'm actually a little bit higher on this team because they're 2-2, and what they rolled out in Tampa was, let's be honest. I mean, if you don't have Lane Johnson, Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, you're screwed. And I think there's this mentality of, should they have been a little bit better? Yeah, but should have been. They won that game? No, you're rolling out Paris Campbell and Johnny Wilson and John Ross. I mean, what? I don't think it's that bad. I think the defense is bad. We'll get to that in a moment. But the offense, I think it's going to be fine. I have questions about the quarterback, but I think it's going to be fine overall. They're going to be very good. It's just a matter of how good.
Yeah, I mean, I think getting those key guys back is obviously going to help. They were 1.5 favorites on the road. I think it should have been
astonishing. That's Vegas's fault.
I think it should have been more competitive, and yeah, it should have been better to the point where, I mean, you can't have your 3 first drives, so the offense result in -5 yards total.
But Dallas Goedert catch the ball, and they got that first down. Who knows? I'm just saying, there's things. It's terrible to go 3 and out 3 consecutive times, but they had opportunities to extend drives, and who knows how that changes the games. I thought it would be much closer. I'm not saying I thought Tampa. What did I pick, Zander? 20-17. I picked Tampa. Yeah. I thought it would be a low-scoring, close game. So by no means am I trying to say they played well. They played very, very poorly. But I think a lot of it is self-explanatory. And boy, I think people expect Kellen Moore to whip up some kind of magic berry dust that gets Paris Campbell open consistently. I don't get that part of it.
Yeah, I think it's again, the offense, there's hope for that unit. Like we said here, the injuries, people get healthy. I think that side of the ball can get back to playing at a pretty, at least if not a high level, pretty solid level. Whereas the defense, I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know where the hope is as much for that unit. Obviously, they were great against the Saints, but going into this game against the Bucs, I had written for BleedingGreenNation.com. I was really interested to see how, Vic Fangio fared after that Saints team ran 11 personnel at the 30th highest rate in the league. And meanwhile, the Bucs entered last week with the 3rd highest rate of 11 personnel. So that was a big change in how, the Eagles were able to defend that team. And clearly it did not go well.
I'm glad you brought that up because I do think styles make bites. And I think the Eagles are better when they can use those 5- and 6-man fronts that he used in New Orleans. And when they get their nickel defense out there, they're just terrible. And Vic was trying to explain it yesterday and evidently told them to get tighter in coverage, and they didn't, or whatever you want to believe. Obviously 15 missed tackles you're not going to win football games if you miss 15 tackles. I don't know how you practice tackling when you don't tackle in practice, but that's a league-wide problem. Where do you start if you're self-scouting this defense and saying, where's BLG starting to fix this defense?
Well, I don't think it's the only reason that the nickel defense has been bad, but I mean, when you have Avonte Maddox, a player the Eagles cut earlier this year, playing like 90% of the snaps in all these games except the Saints game, and a guy too who, the Eagles moved him out of that starting nickel job in training camp. They had Quinyon Mitchell playing that position there. Like this, it's very kind of bizarre how much they've leaned on Avonte Maddox. And I know Cooper DeJean missed time in training camp, but I mean, you would think, and Vic Fangio's comments maybe sort of point towards that, Cooper DeJean is on the rise here, and we could see more of him after the bye. I mean, that's certainly something that seems worth trying to me. Not to say that a rookie is instantly going to fix everything, but also just the potential that even if he does not play well from the jump, that he could get better later on in the season. And it's kind of the point of playing young players sometimes is, dealing with those startup costs. I think that's somewhere I would start is taking Avonte Maddox, everything has been targeted by opposing offenses off the field and getting DeGene in there. And obviously, you can mix in Sidney Brown too, with him potentially getting back here and more so probably on those early run downs there. Having him as a nickel defender could also help. So that's where I would start.
BLG, do you have a sliver of hope inside right now that Bryce Huff is going to have any significant contributions to this football team moving forward? Because we talk about the defense. Pass rush is number one in the league. I mean, this is why people pay so much for great edge rushers. You got to get to the quarterback. It also makes life much easier in your secondary. Our pass rush has been brutal. I said on the show, 36-year-old Brandon Graham is the best guy on the whole D line because he shows up every week. Jalen Carter's great, but if you take days off, you're not going to be the greatest. Any hope on Bryce Huff right now coming out of the bye week?
Yeah, I wouldn't put the defensive performance on the pass rush as much, obviously, in that game against the Bucs, just because of how fast Baker Mayfield's getting out the ball. I don't really know.
Seconds he was slinging that thing.
Yeah, and Josh Sweat had a sack, Brandon Graham had a sack. Not to say the pass rush was amazing, but I don't think like this, or as opposed to like the Falcons game. I think that was more of the pass rush just like not winning when they had chances to do so. So certainly, I'm concerned still about Bryce Huff. I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it at this point. I don't have a lot of faith in that happening just because how invisible he's been. He did log a tackle. He did get in the box score. So I guess that's a step in the right direction. His first solo tackle of the season.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
He's on pace. Now the NFL screwed us with that 17th game.
Yeah.
He'd be on pace for 4 tackles, but maybe he can get that 5th one in the extra game. I asked Vic yesterday, and I believe him. And the reason I believe him is because he generally tells the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't say that about every coach, but when you're talking about the soft coverage, I asked him, when does that adjustment come to try to get him to play a little bit tighter, basically? And he said, we tried to communicate that early, that we had to get tighter, but credit to them, they threw it and caught it better than we defended it. Obviously, didn't go too far into depth, but he said they tried to communicate it early. So, if you're telling the guys to play tighter and they don't, is that a concern for you?
Well, I wonder how much of that too is kind of like him saying we did make an adjustment. The players couldn't execute the adjustment, which is also a problem. And I think coming out of that game, there was a stat posted about how like the Eagles have played the most off coverage in the NFL.
88%.
Yeah. As Nick Sirianni would say, a wise man avoids all extremes, but not in this case.
Or motion, but now
Yeah.
So a wise man evidently does a lot of extremes, but I've probably said it to you because I've said it to everybody. I think the league has figured this scheme out. So many people have played it. It's happened in the past. Tony Dungy had cover 2. Everybody copied it. It's a cyclical thing. And I think so many people copied this particular defensive scheme. Quarterbacks have seen it so much. They understand what to do against it now. It's not as surprising to them with the post snap, spinning off into coverage. And the Eagles are still playing it. And they've been playing it for 4 years. And we talked about these same things with Jonathan Gannon. And everybody's surprised that they play off coverage. That's what it is. Even though you got the best guy to run it, is the problem the scheme, BLG?
Well, I thought it was interesting how apparently leading up to the game last week, Jalen Carter was talking about how he was excited basically to get a chance to play against Baker Mayfield because he expected him to hold on to the ball.
Yeah.
And, if that was the expectation, the Bucs were going to hold on to the ball. I mean, that seems like poor coaching to the extent where, the Bucs did not. That was clearly not their plan at all. Their plan was quick game, the whole game. Yeah. So I think that's a problem. Certainly, especially when we're hearing that from the players and they're expecting this something to go totally different than it actually goes. They weren't ready. They weren't ready for how the Bucs were going to come out and attack them. That we saw that much from the evidence of the results, but even going into the game, their words indicated as much.
But I don't have as much as a problem with that. And I'll tell you why, Brandon, is the fact that, well, you look at New Orleans, they scouted them very well. I mean, they play a ton of 12. They max protect, play action, you know, outside stretch run. They scouted them very well. As you mentioned, on paper, Baker holds on to the football. So I don't have a problem coming into the game thinking that. And that's why when Big said we tried to make the adjustment pretty quickly, nobody listened, essentially. But when they do come out with that quick game, you got to go, oh, whoa, and that's good job to Tampa for changing up their tendencies. But then you got to adjust. And I think Big said he tried to adjust, but for whatever reason, the players weren't listening or engaging in what they were supposed to do early. So I don't have a problem with that, but I have a problem with just the general philosophy, and maybe it's the whole league, of being so passive all the time. Like you think about, especially in this town, you think about defense, you want aggression, and everybody wants aggression. And some of it's overblown and all that stuff. You can't blitz every down and all that nonsense. But boy, you'd like to see a little bit. It's so passive.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would have forced the issue at some point, right? Like at some point, you can't do it all the time, like you're saying. But there has to be a better like balance of that, where there are times and situations where that calls for being more aggressive than not just sitting back all the time as kind of a default.
Yeah. It's getting big. I know Jody, my old partner, Jody McDonald, texted me last night because he's always obsessed with the blitz. And he asked me, what's the blitz percentage for the Eagles? And so I looked it up for him. It's 22.8%, right in the Vic Fangio wheelhouse. I remember saying to Zander, he's like, what's it going to be? It's 22, 23%. I said it all off season. That's what he does. He's been a defensive coordinator forever. He's right in his wheelhouse, 22.8%. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 teams behind the Eagles, which is usually that's, near bottom 5 at 20. So the whole league is going this direction of, playing more too high, playing more shell coverage, making teams go down the field, not being aggressive. The teams that are aggressive, Denver, Minnesota, Tampa Bay with Todd Bowles, Kansas City with Steve Spagnuolo. Those are the defense the Eagles fans want to see. They want to see that aggression. But the whole league is going in one direction. When the whole league goes in one direction, BLG, it tells me, guess what? At that point, it's whoever does it best. If everybody's doing the same thing. I want the guy who's doing something different. That used to be big. It's no longer big. Any problems with that aspect of just going along with the crowd?
I mean, that just seems kind of antithetical to what the Eagles believe in or purport to believe in at a high level, right? Like, part of the reason they go for it, and Jeffrey Lurie comes out in 2017 and says, we're going to go for it on fourth down, like, is to have an edge over the rest of the competition. And that's, something to talk about with Nick Sirianni a lot. And like, what kind of edge is he giving you when we evaluate him? So yeah, I would think in theory, like you're looking to zag a little bit when everyone else is zigging, or however you want to look at that. I mean, that's kind of like what the Eagles did with the Saquon Barkley signing, right?
Yeah.
Like in a way that like where, okay, everyone's like, don't pay running backs. Okay.
And I'm waiting for that, BLG. They always take pride in doing that. I'm waiting for them to make that turn on defense.
Yeah, it's not. I think it's
not coming. It's not coming now.
Yeah, I think they clearly have, liked Vic Fangio for a little bit here, but it's kind of at a point where, like, this isn't in 2019 or whatever it is when Sean McVay and all these guys from that system are talking about how Vic Fangio is like the top guy that stops them. Like that's been a few years now.
Yeah. And by the way, you're right. That's the reason why there's so many Fangio's defense, because it was Sean McVay And it was all those guys, the Sean McVay clones, that said, this is the toughest defense. And that's what Nick said. That's why he wanted this defense run as an offensive guy. This is the toughest. This gives me the most problems. I don't think that's the case anymore. And everybody's stuck in the stasis.
Yeah, here's a super chat on this topic, and I want to read it to both of you and get your reaction. BLG, I'll go to you first. He says, we won with short, and thanks, Caleb, by the way, for the super chat. We won with shorts. You can argue the bend but don't break style has cost us a Super Bowl and was responsible for most of our losses since Nick. Is that an overreaction, BLG, or do you agree with the commenter?
Well, I'm a big Jim Schwartz guy, so you're preaching to the choir here.
I'm a big Jim Schwartz guy as well. But I will remember people, to be fair, the Eagles were worse on defense at Super Bowl 52 than they were on Super Bowl.
And he'll tell you that. Jim will tell you that.
Yes, but what happened? Like, they ultimately did make the play that mattered. That was the
one
thing.
play. Yeah.
John, and a credit to you. People judge the results, Johnny Mac.
Yeah, Jim's still upset about how they played in the Super Bowl.
So was Jeffrey Lurie after they lost, even after they won. He brought, remember that? Jeffrey Lurie brought up like how bad their defense was after they won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, they were not good on defense. But overall, Jim's a heck of a defensive coordinator. And if Fletcher Cox was the guy who was like literally depressed at the start of moving away from the Jim Schwartz scheme to this scheme, and he got over it and eventually started playing at a high level again. But I don't know. It's a little bit too passive for me, but it's been successful, and hopefully they can ramp it up and be that. But Vic got asked the question with the 15 missed tackles. How do you practice tackling when you don't tackle? How do you do that? Sometimes there are moments where I think in a weird way, BLG, and that was a moment where I thought to myself, I think Zach asked the question. I said, boy, how did we get here? We're asking Vic Fangio, how do you practice tackling when you don't tackle in practice? And nobody tackles. It's not like the Eagles are some kind of outlier.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we are. So is it just everybody's a bunch of bad tacklers, and it'll get a little bit better because it's not going to be 110 degrees every game day?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think part of it too is that this is like the startup costs of the Eagles not going as hard in camp. And I think we've seen that in years past too. Maybe the tackling probably got better over the course of the season, or at least it was the worst of it was more so early on. And that's probably just a cost the Eagles are going to live with if it means that they're relatively healthy, which they were entering the season, obviously, before all these guys got banged up more recently here once the game started. So, I don't, it's obviously an issue. I don't think it's like, oh, they just can't tackle and they're hopeless in that regard. I think that, there's hope for the tackling getting a little bit better.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. BLG, obviously the biggest problem is the defense, but I got some questions on the offense as well, namely about the quarterback, Jalen Hurts. I want to get your take. I know you guys have a big fan section as well where people check in, leave their comments. I've noticed here, and I live in JAKIB land where I read of all of our viewers, I've noticed a change in terms of, I don't want to say they're turning on Jalen, but they're starting to want more from Jalen Hurts. Where are you on Jalen Hurts? We're 2-2. I mean, he's second in the league in turnovers. Where are you on Jalen Hurts right now, as an elite quarterback and the whole conversation of him here in Philly?
Yeah, I mean, 27 giveaways in the last 22 games, and it just feels like you go into every game, at least me, like you're waiting for it to happen. You know it's going to happen at some point because it keeps happening, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight for him. I think that, and look, we can like parse these again and say, okay, well, maybe he wasn't at fault of the specific one, but if you zoom out, I mean, that number is just, it's too big. And like, I know that, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, they're also up there in terms of the turnover leaders, but they're also not, with this past game aside, they're not like, Jalen Hurts is not tasked with carrying the entire offense the way those guys are, I think, on those teams. And part of those turnovers that happen for those other guys, in part because they're big play hunters and they're gonna do things and be aggressive, and sometimes they're gonna turn the ball over, but more often than not, it's worth it to make those big plays. And also, in the playoffs, Patrick Mahomes is not turning the ball over at a high rate. He's taking care of it, in fact, very well in the postseason. So the turnovers are just a huge issue, and it's hard to really kind of like skate by that part. It's hard to like say like, well, if you just take away the turn, you can't. Like, there's a huge issue, a huge sticking point. And we can, you can get into a lot of other things, and I think they're valid in terms of like Jalen not really utilizing his full all the players on his team, and that's something we talked about in the offseason, going back to last year. There's other issues, but I mean, it just the turnovers are the one that has to get fixed above all else.
All right, tell me if you get this with Jalen Hurts. I think the narrative, and I got this pretty hard yesterday because I tweeted something out about, the fan base, at least a large proportion thinks when things go bad, it's Nick Sirianni is taking over the play calling. When things go good, it's Kellen Moore. Then Seth Walder every once in a while puts out the motion numbers. And the Eagles are way up in motion from what they were with Nick Sirianni, but they're not where they were supposed to be with Kellen Moore, at least with his history. So you have all the conspiracy theorists thinking, oh, it's Nick's offense. Poor Kellen is in the same spot as Brian Johnson. At what point do people look at the quarterback and say maybe they're trying to help the quarterback out?
Yeah, or just how much of it is the quarterback, right? Like how much of the tendencies we're seeing relates to him as opposed to just the offensive coordinator.
Yeah,
they're designed. By the way, you brought up Brian Johnson. Seems to be doing
a
nice job helping
okay.
Jaden Daniels. At least I don't know exactly, how much we're giving him the credit. When Cliff King is calling the plays, but certainly he's not hurting Jaden Daniels, at least down there. So that's kind of funny. But and one of our writers, Johnny Page, who does a lot of good, all 22 film kind of breakdowns for us on bleedinggreennation.com. We'll have the reviews from the Bucs game up on our site, I'm sure, soon here. He mentioned this even before that motion usage was going around really yesterday on Twitter, but just mentioned that like from all his studying of a Kellen Moore offense, like this doesn't really resemble that so much to him. So I think there is something to that, and I don't think it's just about Sirianni. I do think it's about the quarterback too.
BLG, how do you think it's because I was wondering this too, and it's like we keep comparing it to Nick Sirianni and Kellen. Is it possible it's just what you have to do with the quarterback, right? Not even as a knock on them, but certain quarterbacks have different tendencies, different styles, different things they're good at and bad at. Everybody's like, it looks like Nick's offense. I'm like, well, it's still Kellen's offense. Maybe this is just the offense you have to run with Nick or with Jalen Hurts as the quarterback. Is that fair, or is that, or do you think I'm incorrect with that?
Well, it's what I think they have to run it with him, which becomes the reality of what it looks like. So I think it's hard to just say if the offense looks a lot like it did last year, it's hard to just say like, oh, it's all Nick, or Brian Johnson and Kellen Moore just hope both happen to be bad. Like at some point, the quarterback is becoming the common denominator there.
Yeah, plus it's difficult. I mean, if you look at some of these things are so subjective. Seth Walder does it every once in a while. To my knowledge, the motion numbers, I don't think anybody does motion numbers. I haven't seen it from anybody other than Seth, who gets it from ESPN's video tracking team or whatever it is. There's a little bit of if you looked at the missed tackles, for instance, I think True Media had 12, Next Gen Stats had 16, the Eagles had 15. Point is, they missed a lot of tackles, but at times it gets subjective.
Sure.
They are using more motion, significantly more motion. So just from the standpoint of how much Nick is involved versus how much this is Kellen's offense, I mean, I believe me, I got a lot of passionate people saying it's completely Nick's offense because of how bad they were in Tampa Bay. Can you talk them off the ledge? Kellen Moore's calling this offense, game planning this offense. Do you see any evidence to the contrary?
I think, it's ultimately probably more Kellen Moore, but, Nick has a role, especially when I think, a big part of why they've struggled is these slow starts, which date back into last year. And they haven't scored a point in the first quarter in their last 6 games. And I feel like you would think that the game script would be, a key part of the operation and something that I think Nick Sirianni would, in my mind, at least be a little bit more involved with than the play calling later in the flow of the game, as much as he would be like, okay, this is the plan of attack we're going in with. This is what we're going to open it. This is going to be our opening script. This is how we're going to start the game. And those have sucked. They've been terrible. They've been really bad. They've gained like 17 yards combined, I think, on their opening drives this year. 1 first down, 3 punts, and the 1 interception in the Packers game. So, I think a lot of
they've been terrible early. There's no
it's
doubt
Moore's
about
design, but I think Sirianni has ownership in the struggles of it as well.
Well, and I think but John, he's also muddied the water.
Oh, he should have never said what he said.
He admitted it. I mean, he's the one that created the fans.
Oh, I said today that the moment he said that,
I know you did, but I'm just saying to be consistent. It's like, I get you're upset with the fans pushing back.
Yeah, but I think from the standpoint, like, and BLG knows this, like, and Doug was a lot more above board on how he would handle game planning responsibilities. Like, every assistant coach is responsible for some portion of the game plan. Mm-hmm. Jeff Stoutland with the running game is most obvious. But, you give 2 minute to somebody, you give red zone to somebody. Like, everybody's involved. All the major assistant coaches are involved with the game planning. And then Kellen Moore puts it together and puts the script together and calls the plays. It used to be Nick. And as the head coach, he can usurp them in theory at any time. Now, on the the Saquon drop, when he that wasn't the. What is the 4th and 1 he took credit for? Which play was that?
In the Saints game, right?
Yeah. That when he said he basically said on
brotherly shove.
Thank you. The Saquon sort of sweep off the brotherly shove, and he took responsibility for that. Now, I was like, is he trying to protect Kellen Moore? That's his job now, to be the lightning rod. Or did he really usurp him at that moment? I don't know. Could be either or. He's protected AJ and Jalen in the past, as we know, and looked like a fool doing so. So he does protect his guys. Mm-hmm. But boy, that opened in a Pandora's box. He shouldn't have done that. He's creating more issues than needed to be created. But this is a bad setup. This gets to my point, BLG. From Dave, this is a bad setup, man.
Right.
And that's Jeffrey Lurie.
Yeah. I think to the bigger point here, the system allows for this kind of muddling of the waters that we're talking about, the setup. So that's part of the problem. And that's part of why I think he shouldn't have been back, because it's like you brought him. That's been my big thing this week. My big takeaway from this in this season, the Sirianni experience, is that it's how I felt after last season. You kind of, it is a half measure, I think, to bring him back and to try to, tweak things for the coordinators. I know that it would have been a bold move to fire the coach who just took you to the Super Bowl and had you 10-1 or whatever, and you've been in the playoffs every year with. I get that. Guess what? This organization, as we just talked about with the zigging and the zagging thing, they pride themselves on bold moves. I think firing your head coach of that would have been a bold move. I think it would have been like akin to going for it on 4th down. And I think it was out of character for this organization to then keep him. I think they did what they thought. I think they didn't want to fire him. They didn't want to have to do it. They didn't want the optics of that, so they didn't, even though they might have known they should have.
They played it safe. But I do think the other thing they care about a lot, BLJ, like they care about being ahead of the pack, is they care about the perception of themselves. And after firing Doug, which, many didn't like, and then you have a dude who goes to the playoffs 3 straight years and marches to the Super Bowl, fire in. People are going to start to wonder, why, do I really want to coach there? They've had 2 guys go to the Super Bowl and get canned. I think they cared about that a lot as well.
Sure,
Yeah.
but it's like,
Well,
do you want to win, or do you want to, do you care about your perception?
And I think Jeffrey didn't want to be labeled as reactionary, firing another
Sure.
coach after a Super Bowl so soon. I think that's the biggest part of it. At
Sure.
Brandon Gowton, make sure you follow BLG on the X platform, Bleeding Green Nation, as he mentioned, .com. Tremendous daily read there. Get you all your Eagles information in one spot. All right, I'll end it with the social media stuff. What do you do with these guys, man? They just can't stop shooting themselves in the foot. But you can't stop them. I mean, you can't ban it. It's part of they grew up with it. This is the first generation of NFL player that grew up with social media, really. It's a part of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, man, AJ, Slay, CJ, Kenny Gainwell, Devin White, it just creates so many problems, and they're not real problems. They're just distractions. What do you do?
Yeah, it's not a good look. I think the Devin White one when you're in the middle of the game and one of your players, a player that the Eagles gave $3.5 million.
He doesn't even play, by the way. Like,
yeah,
who cares about Devin White at this stage?
Well, who cares? But yeah, it's just like, I think the one that's most troublesome to me is Slay.
Yeah,
because that's a guy who has a C on his chest. He voted a team captain, and I think it is the least team captain behavior to go on social media after the game and then tell everyone how good you are after the Eagles just got their
6
doors
Pro
blown
Bowls.
off on
6 Pro Bowls.
Like, that's just, and he has apologized, but like, man, it's just, and that's not out of character for him. Like, he's done stuff like that in the past before. This is a really
every
deep
week almost.
This is a deep something. This is a deep cut here, but like, I remember back in 2020, I think it was the first season with the Eagles. I think he had his first interception in that Cowboys game late in the year, same game where like Deshaun Jackson had that touchdown catch from Jalen Hurts, and the Eagles got boat raced in that game. They got destroyed, their whole defense. But after the game, Darius Slay is like tweeting left and right about his first pick with the Eagles. It's like, just kind of not really getting it to me. Doesn't really seem to understand either a lot of things, but especially in this town and how it plays in this city. It kind of seems tone deaf at best to me.
Don't you think also with the CJ Gardner-Johnson, specifically that point, like, you got to know who you're working with. And as you mentioned, he's a captain. Like, CJ Gardner-Johnson cares about this shit. He clearly cares a lot about it. Now I wonder if there's going to be some level of a fracture in the locker room that starts, because the reality is CJ's a loud, boisterous guy. He's not just going to sit there and take it like a dog. He's going to have a problem with it. And he's probably going to say something, and he might even hold a grudge, because that's the kind of guy I think CJ Gardner-Johnson is. And he showed he is that way with other players. Now, I don't want to make too much of it right now, but I do wonder, as the captain, if that was just a total lapse of judgment by Darius Slay, whether what he said was right or wrong.
Yeah, again, I just think it's just an all-around bad kind of optics thing where, you're going on Micah Parsons' podcast too. It's just like, is this like, can he not do that? No, it's not
is it that important?
Do it. Yeah. But like, it's just like, who are you like?
Who do it in the off season?
That's what's the upside here? Like, what are you really getting at? What are you winning here? I don't think he's doing himself any favors.
And by the way, BLG, Micah got in trouble with Cowboys fans when he lauded Lane Johnson for Lane's play. I mean, it's sort of a new era of sports, and these guys are friends and they like each other, and obviously the fan bases hate each other. But if I'm the Eagles, I don't know how to stop it, so I can't criticize them for it. I mean,
it's one thing to be friends with other players. I think you're never going to stop that, obviously, but try and avoid, talking about the most loud, obnoxious player on your defense and laughing about it with another player.
By the way, are you getting to the point where like Howie should have went in a different direction at safety? I mean, they tried to get Xavier McKinney. It didn't work out. But if you think about, people would say Justin Simmons, thinking about, he's better than Reed Blankenship. No, but maybe Justin Simmons over a certain someone that shall not be named.
I think CJ is obviously, he's made some big plays this year, and the stop in the Falcons game
That was a great play, by the way.
Should have been a game
Great
winner
play,
for them. So I don't want to say he's been all bad, but obviously the bad has outweighed the good. And if you go by Pro Football Reference, quarterbacks have a 153.3 pass rating when they're throwing his way.
I'm told that's not good.
It's almost near perfect.
That's what they say. That ain't good.
I think my thing with CJ is that, look, the attitude and then all that, I think that's valuable or it has value in it, but it can't substitute for talent and in playing well. It's great that he plays with passion and the energy and all of that. It just doesn't matter if he's playing poorly. That's the thing. And if you're touting the signing because it's so great that he's going to bring the attitude, that should be part of it, but it can't be the main reason. And I think just people had a little bit of a rosier view of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's play from what he was in 2022 when he was excellent, to be clear. And obviously, I think he led the league in interceptions. But my thing with that, and a big reason why the Eagles didn't even re-sign him, I think, is because they felt like this is not exactly the player we want to pay for at his peak. He's probably not going to be that moving forward. That was his peak. And not to say he can't play well again, but I just think that that shouldn't have been the baseline expectation. What you're getting out of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson every single season is getting him coming up with 6 interceptions. So I do think that there's a higher view of him coming into this season than there should have been. Just based on the attitude, based on the nostalgia factor, and I think he can turn it around. I think he can play better than he has this year. But I mean, it better happen fast. Yeah, he has to.
The questions are mounting. BLG, thanks for giving us some extended time today, man. We appreciate it. Make sure you guys follow BLG on Twitter at Brandon Gowton and read all his work at Bleeding Green Nation. BLG, thanks for joining today, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, bud.
There's BLG. Good stuff from BLG. Johnny Mack went a little overtime here today. A lot of good conversation on the show today. Enjoyed it very much. Appreciate everybody in the chat. Got a great crowd in here as always. Make sure you guys hit that like button for us. One last super chat, John. I didn't get to this. Caleb, sorry about that. Caleb says, bend but don't break is okay at times, but in key moments, you must be able to switch up the QB clock and give them something to worry about. Caleb, I would agree for sure. And we'll see if Vic Fangio is able to do that.
I will say, on the bend, that not everybody, obviously situational football. I mean, Brian Flores played bend but don't break and let Green Bay back in the game. Everybody plays bend. It's not bend but don't break versus aggression.
Right. There's nuance into when each of it is used.
And Jim Schwartz used to get killed for the picket fence. Guess what? That's bend but don't break.
Yeah,
when he would roll back, and he played obviously aggressive, especially with the front. One gap attack.
Good context right there, Johnny Man.
Most of the time. So, I mean, well, that's where really defensive coordinators set themselves apart by being able to toggle back and forth depending on situation, and that's typically where Vic has been very good. And I expect him to be very good in that part of it. And people just haven't gotten to see because they haven't gotten into a whole bunch of third and long situations. That's when you'll see more aggressiveness. But, I do think there is a long history in this league, as I've said, of schemes being copied and eventually teams catching up. I think their scheme.